You married him. That was the plan. Nobody mentioned the fine print, that his mother and father came included, still swinging, 3 decades into a fight that never officially ended. You thought divorce was a finish line. For his parents, it turned out to be a starting gun, and now you live inside the echo of a marriage that collapsed before you ever met either of them, in a house you never visited, over grievances you'll never fully understand, but will absolutely be expected to have opinions about. On paper, it's just extended family. In practice, it's a hostage negotiation with better catering. 1. The 2 invitations. The first sign wasn't a fight, it was a seating chart. You're at the kitchen table, laptop open, trying to build something that looks like a normal wedding, and instead you're drawing demilitarized zones. His mother cannot be near his father. His father cannot be near his mother's sister. His mother's new husband is not a topic. You are 28 years old, and you are quietly redrawing the map of a family that split apart before you could vote. Every wedding guide you open confirms it isn't just you. The advice for couples with divorced parents reads like conflict resolution training. Seat them at separate tables, use siblings or grandparents as human buffers, and, the line that stops you cold, you should not have to be the peacekeeper on your own wedding day. Which is a lovely sentiment to read while you are, in fact, peacekeeping. The planners even have a name for the solution: the sweetheart table, a small table for just you and your partner that removes the question of which parent sits at the head. A romantic little island you build specifically so 2 adults in their 60s don't have to breathe the same air. You brief the photographer like it's a security detail. No group shots. Mom's side, then dad's side, never the 2 together, because the one photo of them standing near each other will become a thing, and the thing will last longer than the marriage did. You schedule the toasts so each parent gets their own, because if one of them so much as implies the other, you'll be doing damage control between the salad and the entree. And here's the part nobody warns you about. You start to resent a man you love, just slightly, for a war he didn't start and can't stop. Not because he did anything, because he's the reason you're here, coloring in a battlefield with place cards. The wedding is supposed to be about the 2 of you. Instead, it's a summit. 2 heads of state, 1 fragile ceasefire, and you, the small country that signed a treaty it didn't read. You married a man. You did not realize you were also ratifying a border dispute. 2. The man you married learned this young. Here's what you understand only later. He was fluent in this before he ever met you. He grew up as a translator between 2 people who stopped speaking. Somewhere around age 9, he learned to be sad at one house and happy at the other, to carry his mood like contraband across a border. Therapists have a phrase for exactly this. A child who told one of them that he had to be sad at mommy's house and happy at daddy's house. That's your husband, decades ago, becoming the man you'd eventually marry. The one who reads a room before he enters it. The one who goes strangely quiet when voices rise. The one who can diffuse a tense dinner with a joke and then not sleep for 2 nights. The research is blunt about what this leaves behind. It isn't the divorce itself that marks a kid. It's the conflict, not necessarily the divorce, that puts children at risk. The paperwork is survivable. It's the war afterward that gets absorbed into the body. And the ones whose parents kept fighting long after the decree don't get the relief the amicable ones do. They just get a longer education in bracing. There's a colder statistic underneath your marriage too, one you find at 1 a.m. and immediately wish you hadn't. Children of divorce carry a measurably higher chance of divorcing themselves. The divorce cycle. One landmark study found marriages were nearly twice as likely to fail when one partner came from a divorced family, and roughly 3 times as likely when both did. You read that and do the math on your own life like it's a weather forecast. You are not superstitious, you reread it anyway. But here's what the statistic misses. He didn't come out of that house broken, he came out watchful. He notices when you've had a bad day before you say a word. He apologizes fast, sometimes too fast, because in his childhood, an unresolved argument meant someone might leave. He wants your marriage to work with an intensity that occasionally frightens you, because he has seen, up close, the exact machinery of how it doesn't. You didn't marry a man with baggage. You married a man who packed carefully, because he's watched luggage explode. The tragedy and the gift are the same thing. He will do anything to avoid becoming his parents, which means some nights he can't tell the difference between a normal fight and the beginning of the end. 3. The holidays come in halves. You used to think a holiday was a day. Now you know it's a logistics problem with a turkey attached. Thanksgiving is no longer Thanksgiving. It's 2 Thanksgivings, sometimes 3, ranked and timed and negotiated weeks in advance because his mother's dinner cannot overlap with his father's. And whoever gets you first reads meaning into it that you will pay for in December. You eat 1 full meal at noon out of obligation and a second full meal at 5 out of guilt, and you drive between them in a silence so specific it has its own texture. He grips the wheel. You watch the exits go by. Neither of you says the obvious thing, which is that you'd both rather be home eating cereal. This is not a niche problem, and it's getting less niche every year. Divorce among older Americans, gray divorce, has climbed sharply, with rates roughly tripling in the 65 and over group in recent decades, which means more couples like you standing in more driveways, splitting more holidays between parents who will never again sit at the same table and have somehow made that everyone's problem but their own. The cruelest part is the accounting. You keep a mental ledger nobody asked you to keep. Did we do mom's birthday and dad's birthday equally? Did we stay the same number of hours? Did the Christmas card list secretly favor one side? His parents count too, quietly, constantly. And if the math comes out lopsided, you'll hear about it in the form of a wounded voicemail that begins with, "I don't want to make this a thing, but..." It is always going to be a thing. And the person who feels it most, strangely, is you. Because you came in from outside. You have no childhood loyalty pulling you one direction, which means you're the only adult in the family capable of seeing how insane the whole arrangement is. And the only one not allowed to say so. His siblings are numb to it. He's been managing it since grade school. You're the newcomer who still remembers that holidays used to be relaxing, and you get to grieve that quietly while carving your second turkey of the day. You wanted to marry into a family. What you got was a scheduling app with feelings. 4. You become the Switzerland. At some point, you can't name the exact day, you become the demilitarized zone. It starts small. His mother texts you instead of him because you're easier to talk to, which is a compliment the way being handed a live wire is a compliment. His father asks you casually whether the other one is still with that man. You're folding laundry with your phone wedged against your shoulder, translating one parent to the other in real time, softening the verbs, deleting the adjectives, running a diplomatic wire service out of your own living room. You have become the buffer. Every guide on divorced families quietly recommends one. A designated person who keeps the peace so the couple doesn't have to. What none of them mention is that the buffer is a person, and the person is tired. You are absorbing conflict that predates you by 20 years, and you're doing it in a role you never applied for, with no training and no exit. The therapists have language for this, and it's not flattering. It's called triangulation. When 2 people in conflict pull in a third to carry what they won't hold themselves, you are the third. You are the emotional support animal for 2 grown adults who had you in their lives for 18 months before they started downloading the divorce onto your nervous system. The advice for adult children in this spot is clean and impossible. Say some version of "I love you, but I can't be the one to process this with you." Draw the line. Hang up if you have to. Easy to read. Try saying it to a man's crying mother at Christmas. Eventually you learn the boundary anyway, because you have to. You tell him, gently, then not gently, that you are not the messenger. That if his father has something to say to his mother, there's a phone, and it isn't yours. It lands like a small betrayal, because for a while you were good at this, and being good at something is its own trap. You were so competent at absorbing their war that everyone forgot to ask whether it was costing you anything. It was. It was costing you the version of yourself that used to answer the phone without flinching. You didn't sign up to be the peace treaty. You just happened to be standing in the room when everyone needed somewhere to put the blame. 5. The war has no ceasefire. You keep waiting for it to end. That's the part that breaks you slowly. You assume, because you're a reasonable person, that time heals this. That at some point 2 people in their late 60s simply run out of energy to hate each other. They don't. The clinicians put it plainly. Marriages come and go, but high-conflict divorce is forever. The scars are well documented, the effects long-lasting, and the fight, in the worst cases, doesn't burn out. It just changes fuel. What started as custody becomes graduations. What was graduations becomes weddings. Now it's grandchildren. And you are holding the newest front line in your own arms, a baby who will someday learn to be happy at one house and careful at the other, exactly like his father before him. You watch your husband, 40 years old, get a certain phone call and become 9 again, shoulders up, voice flat. That old childhood posture of a kid waiting to find out which parent he's supposed to be disappointed in this week. And you realize the divorce didn't end anything. It just relocated the marriage into a permanent Cold War, with the children as territory and the grandchildren as reinforcements. The specific loneliness of your position is that no one thinks you're allowed to be sad about it. There's no ritual for this, no casserole, no card. When someone's parents divorce late, the grown children grieve in silence, and the in-laws grieve even quieter, because who are you to mourn a marriage you never saw? You didn't lose anything, technically. You just inherited the wreckage and got told to be grateful there was a wedding at all. So you developed the coping rituals, the pre-visit briefing in the car, the code word for "we're leaving in 10 minutes", the way you and your husband debrief afterward like two agents comparing notes, half laughing, half hollow. Did you catch what she said about the seating at the christening? You catch everything now. You've been trained by professionals, 2 of them, permanently at war, tuition paid in your weekends. You wanted a family with a beginning. You married into one that only has a middle. And the ceasefire you keep planning for, the one where they finally grow up and let it go, that's not a peace treaty. That's a fantasy you tell yourself so you can keep driving to the next holiday. 6. The thing nobody says. Here's the thing nobody says out loud. The one you only admit at midnight, in the dark, to the ceiling. Some nights you're not sure whether you married a man or adopted a conflict. You love him. That's not in question. That's what makes it exhausting. If you didn't love him, the whole thing would be simple. You'd set a boundary the size of a state line and never think about his parents again. But you do love him, which means his war is now partly your war, and the mother who texts you and the father who interrogates you are, like it or not, the grandparents of the child asleep down the hall. And this is the quiet danger the research keeps circling. It's never really the parents who threaten your marriage. It's what carrying them does to the two of you. Adult children of high-conflict divorce describe watching their own marriages strain under the weight of families they couldn't fix, right up until the moment they stopped trying to fix them and started protecting their own household instead. That's the turn. That's the whole thing. You cannot end their war. You can only decide it doesn't get to move into your house. So you build the sweetheart table again. Except this time it's not for a reception. It's your actual marriage, a small, defended island where his mother's grievances and his father's silences are not invited. You learn to say that's between them. You learn to let a wounded voicemail go unanswered until morning. You learn that loving him does not obligate you to referee the 2 people who taught him that love was something that ends in a lawyer's office. Some nights he thanks you for it, quietly, like a man who spent his childhood waiting for someone to choose calm on purpose. Some nights he can't, because the old posture is back and he's 9 again, and you just hold the space until he's 40 again. That's the marriage, not the fairy tale, the holding. You didn't get the in-laws from the movies. You got 2 people who couldn't make it work and never learned how to stop performing that failure at every holiday for the rest of their lives. And you got him, the boy who survived it, watchful and tender and terrified, who married you anyway because some part of him believed it could be different. Making it different is the whole job now, not fixing their war, just refusing to reenact it. You married a man whose parents are still at war, and you spent years thinking your job was to end it. It wasn't. Your job was to build one house they can't burn down, and to love the man who grew up in the ashes, gently, on purpose, one carefully divided holiday at a time.